My true story from Colorado. My son-in-law said, "This house isn't yours," so I sold it. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart in any way, leave a comment and let us know. A like and a subscription mean the world to us. They help keep these stories alive. My name is Eleanor May Thompson, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived in Colorado Springs for most of my life, watching the majestic Pikes Peak change colors with the seasons from my kitchen window. For 45 years, this modest two-story house on Maple Street was my sanctuary, the place where I raised 3 children, nursed my husband through his final illness, and thought I'd spend my remaining days surrounded by love, laughter, and the warm chaos of family gatherings. I was devastatingly wrong about that last part. 3 years ago, on a cold February evening when the snow was falling thick outside my windows, my middle daughter Sarah called me. Her voice was barely recognizable through the tears, raw, desperate, broken, in a way that made my maternal heart clench with immediate panic. "Mom," she sobbed into the phone, her words coming in hiccuping gasps. "I don't know what we're going to do. Derek lost his job at the plant 3 weeks ago, and we've been trying to figure things out, but the bills keep coming, and now?" Her voice broke completely. "Sarah, honey, take a deep breath. Tell me what's happening." "The bank called today. They're starting foreclosure proceedings on our house. We have 60 days, Mom. 60 days before we lose everything. Derek's been looking for work, but nothing's paying what he made before, and my hours at the clinic aren't enough to cover the mortgage and all our other expenses. The kids don't know yet, but Emma keeps asking why Daddy looks so sad all the time. And Jake heard us arguing about money last night." My heart shattered listening to her pain. Sarah was 38 then, had been married to Derek for 12 years, and they had 2 beautiful children, my granddaughter Emma, 10 years old and wise beyond her years, and my grandson Jake, 7 and full of boundless energy and curiosity. The thought of those precious babies having to uproot their entire lives because of financial hardship was unbearable. "Mom," Sarah continued, her voice small and defeated, "Derek's parents offered to let us move in with them in Oklahoma, but that would mean taking Emma and Jake away from their school, their friends, everything they've ever known. Emma just made the honor roll, and Jake finally made friends on the soccer team after being shy for so long. I can't bear the thought of disrupting their lives like that, but I don't see any other choice." Without hesitation, without even taking a moment to consider the implications, I heard myself say, "Come home, sweetheart. Come home to me. There's plenty of room here, and you know I'd love nothing more than to have my grandchildren close by." "Mom, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. I'm insisting, actually. Pack up whatever you need and come home. We'll figure out the rest together." The following Saturday, Derek rented a large U-Haul truck, and what had been my peaceful, quiet house for the 5 years since Paul passed away suddenly exploded with activity. Boxes labeled Emma's room and kitchen stuff and Derek's tools filled my hallways. The sound of children's laughter, something I'd missed desperately, echoed through rooms that had grown too accustomed to silence. I didn't charge them rent. The very idea seemed absurd and heartless. These weren't tenants. They were my family, my blood, people I loved who needed help during the most difficult period of their lives. Instead, I threw open every door of my home and my heart completely. Sarah and Derek moved into Sarah's old childhood bedroom, the same room where she dreamed about her future as a teenager, where I'd sat on the edge of her bed reading her stories and listening to her hopes and fears. Emma and Jake took over the guest room that had been gathering dust since Paul died, transforming it overnight from a sterile space for occasional visitors into a vibrant children's wonderland. I converted my sewing room, where I'd spent countless hours creating quilts and mending clothes over the years, into a proper playroom. I bought new toys, art supplies, board games, and a small desk where they could do homework. I wanted them to feel completely at home, not like temporary guests who had to tiptoe around someone else's space. Those first few months were genuinely wonderful, like a blessing I hadn't dared to hope for. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I'd start coffee, then begin preparing breakfast, fluffy pancakes shaped like animals for the children, perfectly scrambled eggs for Derek, and toast with homemade jam for Sarah. The kitchen would fill with the sounds of a busy household, Emma practicing spelling words aloud, Jake chattering about his dreams from the night before, Derek and Sarah discussing their plans for the day. I packed Emma and Jake's school lunches with the same care I'd once put into packing lunches for my own children decades earlier. Little sandwiches cut into fun shapes, apple slices with notes tucked inside that said things like, "Have a wonderful day, sweetheart," and "Grandma loves you more than all the stars." The children would beam when they discovered these messages, sometimes saving them in their backpacks for weeks. After school became my favorite time of day. Emma and Jake would burst through the front door like small tornadoes, backpacks flying, stories about their day tumbling out in excited streams. We'd sit together at the kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd helped my own children with their homework, working through math problems, reading assignments, and science projects. Emma was naturally academic, methodical, and careful with her work, while Jake needed more encouragement, but had a creative spirit that delighted me. Sarah would come home exhausted from picking up extra shifts at the medical clinic where she worked as a nurse. Her supervisor had been understanding about the family situation and offered overtime whenever possible, but I could see the strain wearing on her. She'd drag through the door at 7 or 8 in the evening, sometimes later, looking defeated and overwhelmed. But she'd always find the energy to smile when she saw dinner ready on the table. Pot roast with vegetables, homemade chicken and dumplings, her childhood favorite of tuna casserole. Derek spent his days job hunting, which I completely understood was stressful and demoralizing. The manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 8 years had closed permanently, relocating their operations to Mexico. He was 41 years old, had been with the same company since he was 33, and suddenly found himself competing against younger men and older men with more experience. I tried to make everything as easy as possible for him. Breakfast ready when he woke up, a quiet house for his phone interviews, encouraging words when he came home from disappointing meetings. I became the family chauffeur, and I loved every minute of it. I drove Emma to her weekly piano lessons with Mrs. Patterson, the same teacher who had taught Sarah decades earlier. I took Jake to soccer practice twice a week and cheered from the sidelines during weekend games, often being the loudest voice in the small crowd of parents. I attended every school event, parent-teacher conferences, school plays where Emma had small but important roles, science fairs where Jake displayed volcanoes and solar system models we'd built together. When the children were sick, I was the one who stayed up all night with cool washcloths and homemade chicken soup. I'd sit beside their beds reading stories in soft voices, checking temperatures, and providing the comfort that only a grandmother can give. I loved every moment of feeling truly needed and useful again, of having a vital role in these precious lives. Derek found work after 4 months of searching. Not the same salary as his previous job, but steady income at a local construction company. The day he got the news, I was so proud and relieved that I spent the entire afternoon preparing his favorite meal: pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes, green beans from my own garden that I'd frozen the previous summer, and apple pie made from scratch. We all sat around my dining room table that evening, laughing and sharing stories, making plans for the future that seemed bright and hopeful again. "We should be able to start looking for our own place soon," Sarah said that night, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Maybe in a few months, once we've saved up enough for a deposit and first month's rent. Thank you, Mom, for everything. I honestly don't know what we would have done without you. You saved us." But as weeks turned into months, and months stretched toward a year, the conversation about moving out gradually stopped coming up entirely. I didn't mind at first. Truthfully, I was thrilled to have them there. My house felt alive again in a way it hadn't since Paul passed away. It had purpose and energy and the beautiful chaos that comes with children. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the dynamics began to shift in ways that left me feeling increasingly uncomfortable in my own home. It started with small things that I initially dismissed as minor adjustments to shared living. Derek would walk into the living room where I was watching my evening programs, usually something quiet like the news or a cooking show, and simply change the channel without asking what I was watching or if I minded. The first time it happened, I assumed it was accidental. "Oh, Derek," I said gently. "I was actually watching that program about the national parks." "Sorry, Eleanor," he replied, but his tone was distracted rather than apologetic, and his finger stayed on the remote button. "I just wanted to catch the scores." The next evening, the same thing happened. And the evening after that, when I tried to mention it again, he'd say, "Oh, sorry," but never actually change it back or ask what I preferred. Gradually, I found myself retreating to my bedroom in the evenings, watching my small television there, because it was easier than dealing with the awkward tension. Then, Derek began rearranging furniture throughout the house, making changes that felt presumptuous and hurtful. My favorite armchair, a beautiful burgundy recliner where Paul and I used to sit together in the evenings, where he'd hold my hand while we watched old movies, was suddenly moved to a corner to make room for Derek's new leather recliner that dominated the center of the living room. "We needed something bigger," Derek explained when I discovered the change. "Something more comfortable for the whole family." The whole family. The phrase stung, because it seemed to exclude me, as if I wasn't part of the family unit that deserved comfort in what was still, legally and emotionally, my home. Sarah started working longer and longer hours, accepting every overtime shift offered, and sometimes staying late to help with inventory or training new staff. I understood that they needed the money, especially if they were serious about eventually finding their own place, but her absence meant I was spending more time alone with Derek, and our interactions were becoming increasingly strained. She'd arrive home exhausted and stressed, sometimes snapping at Emma and Jake over minor things. Homework left on the kitchen counter, toys not put away immediately, normal childhood behaviors that had never bothered her before. When I tried to gently intervene or offer suggestions based on my years of parenting experience, she'd respond with sharp comments like, "Mom, I've got it handled," or "I know how to parent my own children." The criticism hurt deeply, especially since I'd been the one caring for Emma and Jake most of the time, helping with homework, managing their schedules, and providing the stability that allowed Sarah to work such demanding hours. Derek's confidence grew substantially as he settled into his new job and began earning praise from his supervisor. With that confidence came an attitude I'd never seen before, or perhaps had chosen not to see during the early months when everyone was focused on basic survival. He started making unilateral decisions about the house without consulting me, treating it as if he had equal authority over a space that he neither owned nor paid to maintain. New paint colors appeared in the living room, a dark gray that made the space feel smaller and more somber than the warm beige Paul and I had carefully selected. Derek arranged for a different internet provider without asking, switching to a more expensive package with faster gaming speeds that he wanted. When I received the bill and questioned the change, he said, "Don't worry about it, Eleanor. I'll take care of the extra cost." But he never did, and the higher bill simply absorbed into my monthly expenses. Most jarring was the day I came home from grocery shopping to find that Derek had changed the locks on all the doors. The keys I'd carried for 45 years no longer worked in my own home. When I struggled with the front door for several minutes, Derek appeared and handed me a new key. "Just making improvements," he said casually. "The old locks were getting sticky, and this is better security for everyone." I stood there holding the key to my own house, feeling like a guest being granted access rather than the homeowner coming home. The symbolism was devastatingly clear, even if Derek claimed it was just practical maintenance. The situation reached a new low when Derek's friends began treating my house as their regular hangout spot. 3 or 4 men in their 30s and 40s would arrive several evenings a week, settling onto my front porch with cases of beer and packs of cigarettes. They'd laugh loudly, use profanity that made me cringe when the grandchildren were within earshot, and leave bottles, cigarette butts, and food wrappers scattered around my carefully maintained yard. One evening, when Emma was at the kitchen table struggling with a particularly difficult math assignment and Jake was trying to read a book for school, the noise level on the porch became so disruptive that neither child could concentrate. I approached Derek, who was holding court in the center of his friend group, and asked politely, "Derek, could you ask everyone to keep it down just a bit? The children are trying to do their homework, and it's a school night." Derek looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, almost disdainful. His friends had gone quiet, watching our interaction with obvious interest. "It's not that late, Eleanor," Derek said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "And we're not being unreasonable. Maybe you're just getting a bit sensitive in your old age." Old age. The words hit me like a physical slap. His friends chuckled, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks as embarrassment and anger warred in my chest. I retreated into the house without another word, helping Emma and Jake relocate to the quieter dining room to finish their homework. The pattern of disrespect accelerated rapidly after that incident. Derek would come home from work and immediately turn up the television volume, even when I was reading quietly in the living room or trying to have a phone conversation with my sister in Denver. He'd cook elaborate meals without asking if I'd already prepared something, then act annoyed when there was too much food, or when I didn't want to eat the heavily spiced dishes that upset my sensitive stomach. He started parking his large pickup truck directly in front of the garage, in the exact spot where I'd parked my modest sedan for 4 decades. This forced me to park on the street, which was not only inconvenient, but also meant I had to carry heavy grocery bags much farther, struggle with icy sidewalks in winter, and worry about my car being damaged by passing vehicles. When I mentioned these issues to Sarah during our increasingly rare moments alone together, she'd sigh heavily and say things like, "Mom, Derek's under enormous pressure at work. His supervisor is demanding, and he's still trying to prove himself. Can't you just try to be more flexible and understanding?" Flexible. Understanding. I was 73 years old, had opened my home and heart completely to help them through their crisis, and was being asked to be more accommodating about being treated as an inconvenience in my own space. The children, unfortunately, began reflecting their parents' attitudes toward me. Emma, who had always been respectful and loving, started rolling her eyes when I offered to help with her homework or suggested activities we might do together. When I'd ask about her day or show interest in her school projects, she'd respond with one-word answers and return to her phone or tablet as quickly as possible. Jake began ignoring me entirely when I called him for meals, continuing to play his video games or watch television until Derek or Sarah intervened. The little boy who had once run to me with scraped knees and exciting stories about his friends now treated me like furniture, present but irrelevant to his daily life. The breaking point that would change everything began building on a crisp Saturday morning in October, when the maple trees outside were turning brilliant shades of gold and red. I'd been looking forward to taking Emma and Jake to Johnson's Pumpkin Patch, a family tradition I'd maintained with all my children and grandchildren for decades. I'd planned a perfect autumn day: pumpkin picking, apple cider, maybe a hay ride if the weather cooperated. I was in the kitchen making a special breakfast of pumpkin pancakes and turkey sausage when Derek's brother Tom arrived unexpectedly with his wife Linda and their 2 teenage sons, Marcus and Tyler. They were driving through Colorado on their way to visit Linda's parents in Utah and had decided to make an unscheduled stop. "Hey, this is perfect timing," Derek announced loudly, embracing his brother in the middle of my kitchen. "You guys should definitely stay the weekend. We've got plenty of room, and it'll be great to catch up properly." I looked up from the pancakes I was carefully flipping, my stomach dropping at the presumptuous nature of Derek's invitation. Tom's family lived in Kansas and visited perhaps once every 2 years, usually with advance notice. I barely knew Linda, and the teenage boys were strangers to me. Tall, boisterous young men who immediately began exploring my house as if they owned it. "Oh, Derek," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice pleasant. "I wish you'd asked me first. I don't have nearly enough food prepared for everyone, and the guest room has Emma and Jake's things in it. I'd need some time to prepare proper accommodations." "Eleanor," Derek interrupted, his voice sharp with embarrassment in front of his family, "don't worry about it. We'll figure everything out. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal to me. I took pride in being a gracious hostess, in having clean sheets and adequate meals and proper arrangements for guests. The idea of Tom's family thinking I was unprepared or unwelcoming was mortifying, but I also felt trapped by Derek's assumption that he could make these decisions without any input from the actual homeowner. I continued cooking, but my hands were shaking slightly with stress and frustration. The kitchen suddenly felt impossibly small, with 7 additional people crowded into it. Marcus and Tyler, both around 16 and 17, were loud and seemed to feel entitled to help themselves to whatever they wanted. They opened my refrigerator without asking, grabbed juice and left the door standing open, rummaged through my pantry looking for snacks. "Boys, please close the refrigerator door," I said as gently as possible, not wanting to create conflict but needing to maintain some basic courtesy in my own home. Marcus looked at me with the blank indifference that seems to be a specialty of teenage boys, shrugged without saying anything, and walked away without closing the door. Tom and Linda were engrossed in animated conversation with Derek and Sarah, paying no attention to their son's behavior or my obvious discomfort. I closed the refrigerator myself and returned to the stove, where the pancakes were beginning to burn around the edges from my divided attention. When I finally managed to finish cooking and set the large platter of pancakes on the table, Tyler reached directly across me to grab the syrup bottle, bumping my arm and nearly causing me to drop the hot, heavy plate. "Careful, honey," I said, my voice strained but still polite. "Let me set this down safely first, and then you can reach whatever you need." That's when Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was flushed with what I could only interpret as embarrassment or anger, possibly both. The entire kitchen fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. "Eleanor," he said, his voice not just loud enough for everyone to hear, but deliberately projected to make sure no one could miss his words. "Stop acting like this house isn't big enough for all of us. Stop trying to control every little thing. This isn't about you and your need for everything to be perfect. This house isn't yours anymore anyway. It's a family home now, and family doesn't make other family jump through hoops for basic hospitality." The words hit me like a freight train. This house isn't yours anymore. The kitchen went completely silent. Even Marcus and Tyler, who had been chattering constantly since their arrival, stopped talking and stared. Tom and Linda looked mortified. Sarah's face went white, and she stared down at her coffee cup as if she could disappear into it. Emma and Jake were at the table, their eyes wide with confusion and discomfort, watching this humiliating scene unfold. I stood there holding the empty serving platter, feeling as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. This man, this person I had welcomed into my home, fed, supported, treated like a son, had just declared that the house where I'd lived for 45 years, where I'd raised my children and buried my husband, where every mortgage payment had come from my bank account, was no longer mine. And my daughter, my own child, said absolutely nothing in my defense. I set the platter down with shaking hands, removed my apron, and walked quietly to my bedroom. Behind me, I could hear the conversation slowly resuming. Derek's voice a little too loud and jovial, as if nothing earth-shattering had just occurred. I sat on the edge of the bed I'd shared with Paul for 30 years and looked around the room that held so many precious memories. Our wedding photo on the nightstand, taken when we were young and full of dreams. The quilt my mother had made for us as a wedding gift. Its colors faded, but its warmth unchanged. The window that looked out on the garden Paul and I had planted together, where we'd watched seasons change and children grow. This house isn't yours anymore, but it was mine. Legally, financially, emotionally, spiritually, it was mine in every way that mattered. Paul and I had saved every penny for the down payment in 1979, when interest rates were crushing and we could barely qualify for the mortgage. We'd painted every room ourselves, fixed every leak, replaced every worn piece of flooring. We'd planted every tree in the yard, tended every flower bed, celebrated every holiday within these walls. And I'd been foolish enough to let someone convince me to forget all of that. That evening, after Tom's family had left, cutting their visit short due to what Linda diplomatically called unexpected travel complications, and after the house had returned to its usual tense quiet, I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't announce it or discuss it with anyone. I simply picked up my phone and called Janet Morrison, a real estate agent I'd known from church for over 20 years. "Janet," I said quietly, sitting in my bedroom with the door closed, "I need to discuss selling my house." "Eleanor? This seems awfully sudden. Is everything all right? You've lived in that beautiful home for so long." "It's time for a change," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Can we meet this week to discuss the process?" "Of course. Are you sure about this decision? It's a big step, and the market can be unpredictable." I thought about Derek's words, about feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own home, about my daughter's painful silence when I was publicly humiliated in front of my grandchildren. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We met on Tuesday morning at a small coffee shop downtown, while Derek was at work and Sarah was at the clinic. Janet spread market analysis papers and comparable sales across our small table, her expression growing increasingly surprised as she reviewed the data. "Eleanor, your house is in exceptional condition," she said, looking up at me with excitement. "Paul's renovations over the years, your meticulous maintenance, and the current market conditions. I think we could list it for significantly more than you might expect." The number she showed me was staggering. 45 years of mortgage payments, careful improvements, and a seller's market had transformed my modest home into a valuable asset worth far more than I'd ever imagined. "How quickly do you think it might sell?" I asked. "In this market, with proper staging and competitive pricing? Probably within 3 to 4 weeks. There's tremendous demand for homes in your neighborhood, especially ones that have been so well maintained. Are you absolutely certain about this decision, Eleanor? Once we list it, things will move very quickly." I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The months of feeling invisible and unwelcome in my own home, the gradual erosion of basic respect, the devastating moment when someone had declared that my life's greatest investment was no longer mine. "List it," I said firmly. We officially listed the house that Thursday morning. Janet installed the for sale sign while everyone was gone. Derek at his construction job, Sarah at the medical clinic, Emma and Jake at school. I spent the day cleaning and organizing, not because the house was dirty, but because I needed to stay busy and because preparing for showings gave me a sense of control I'd been missing for months. The first potential buyers were scheduled to view the house on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Derek discovered the real estate sign when he arrived home from work Friday evening. "Eleanor!" His voice boomed through the house, echoing off the walls with a fury I'd never heard before. "What the hell is this sign doing in our front yard?" Our front yard. Even now, even after everything he'd said, even in his anger, he couldn't help but claim ownership of my property. Sarah came running from the kitchen where she'd been helping Jake with a school project, her face pale with shock. "Mom, what's happening? Why is there a real estate sign outside?" I was sitting calmly in my armchair, the burgundy recliner that Derek had displaced, but that I'd quietly moved back to its proper position earlier that day. I looked at both of them with a composure that surprised even me. "I'm selling the house." "You're what?" Derek's face was rapidly turning red, the veins in his neck becoming visible. "You can't sell this house. We live here. Emma and Jake go to school in this district. You can't just destroy our lives because you're having some kind of senior moment." Senior moment. Another casual insult, another dismissal of my intelligence and agency. "Yes," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "You do live here. In my house. The house that, as you so clearly reminded me last weekend in front of your entire family, isn't mine anymore." Sarah sank into a chair, her face crumpling. "Mom, Derek didn't mean it the way it sounded. He was just stressed with Tom's family showing up unexpectedly and—" "Yes, he did mean it exactly the way it sounded," I interrupted, looking directly at Derek. "And the truth is, he was right about one thing. This house hasn't felt like mine for quite some time, so I've decided to find a place that will." "But where will we live?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, and for the first time in months, she sounded like my little girl instead of a woman who'd grown tired of her mother's presence. "You'll figure it out. You're both intelligent adults with steady jobs and years of life experience. You were planning to move out eventually anyway. This just accelerates your timeline." Derek was pacing now, running his hands through his hair, his movements agitated and aggressive. "You can't do this to us, Eleanor. You can't just kick your own family out onto the street like we're strangers. What kind of grandmother does this to her grandchildren?" The accusations stung, but I'd had days to prepare for this conversation. "I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm selling my house and moving somewhere else. Standard practice is to give tenants 30 days notice after closing, which is exactly what I'm giving you. That's more than enough time for responsible adults to find alternative housing." "Tenants?" Derek's voice cracked with outrage. "We're not tenants. We're family." "Family treats each other with respect and gratitude," I said calmly. "Family doesn't make someone feel unwelcome in their own home. Family doesn't declare that someone's life's work and most precious possession isn't theirs anymore." The house sold in exactly 2 weeks. A young couple from Denver, both teachers relocating for new positions in the district, fell in love with the property immediately. They appreciated the mature maple trees in the front yard, the mountain views from the kitchen window, the careful updates Paul had made over the years, and the obvious love that had been invested in every room. During those 2 weeks, the atmosphere in the house was unbearable. Derek alternated between cold, sullen silence and explosive outbursts about my selfishness and cruelty. He spent hours on his phone and computer, frantically searching for apartments they could afford on their combined income, a reality check that seemed to genuinely surprise him. Sarah cried frequently, sometimes openly, and sometimes in muffled sobs I could hear through her bedroom door. She also began apartment hunting with an urgency that suggested she was finally understanding the true precariousness of their situation. The wake-up call was clearly devastating, but also perhaps necessary. The children were confused, upset, and occasionally angry. Emma asked me repeatedly why I was breaking up the family, and Jake refused to speak to me for several days. I felt terrible about their distress, but I also recognized that they'd been learning some very unhealthy lessons about how to treat people who love and help you. Perhaps this experience would teach them something different about respect, consequences, and the importance of gratitude. On the night before closing, I sat alone in the empty living room. Most of my furniture was already in storage or had been moved to my new home, and the space echoed with decades of memories. Sarah found me there around 10 o'clock, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall where family photos had hung for years. "Mom," she said softly, settling cross-legged on the carpet beside me. "I need to say something, and I need you to really hear me." I nodded, prepared for another emotional plea to change my mind. "I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for all of it. Derek was wrong to say what he said, and I was wrong, terribly wrong, to stay silent when he disrespected you in your own home. I was wrong to let the situation deteriorate to this point, and I was wrong to ask you to be more flexible instead of demanding that my husband treat my mother with basic human dignity." Her apology was more thorough and honest than I'd expected, and I felt some of the anger I'd been carrying begin to soften. "Why didn't you speak up?" I asked. "In all those months, why didn't you ever defend me?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Because it was easier not to. Because Derek gets angry when he's challenged, and I was already exhausted from working so much and worrying about money. Because I convinced myself that you were strong enough to handle it, and that it was temporary anyway. Because I'm a coward who chose the path of least resistance instead of doing what was right." Her honesty was painful, but appreciated. "Will you forgive me?" she asked. I looked at my daughter, my middle child who had always been the peacemaker, the one who avoided conflict even when conflict was necessary and right. "Of course I forgive you," I said simply. "But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen. And it doesn't mean I'm willing to accept being treated poorly in the future." "I understand. Where will you go?" For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. "I found a perfect little cottage on the other side of town. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a small garden area, and a beautiful view of the mountains. It's exactly the right size for one person who wants to live peacefully. Can we visit? The kids and me, I mean. Not Derek, obviously, but when you're ready to treat me with the love and respect I deserve, you'll always be welcome in my home." The closing was held on a Wednesday morning at the title company downtown. I signed dozens of papers, handed over the keys to Mark and Jennifer, the young couple who would fill my house with new memories, and walked out of the building as the former owner of the house on Maple Street. Derek and Sarah had found a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex across town. It was significantly smaller than what they'd grown accustomed to, and the rent consumed a much larger percentage of their combined income than they'd anticipated. But it was theirs, and perhaps for the first time in their marriage, they were truly responsible for their own lives without any safety net. My new cottage exceeded every expectation I'd had. It was smaller than the house I'd left, but every single square inch belonged to me completely. No one could change my television channel, move my furniture, invite unexpected guests, or make me feel unwelcome in my own space. I bought all new dishes, cheerful yellow ceramic plates that made me smile every morning. I planted herbs in small pots by the kitchen window, basil, oregano, thyme, and rosemary that filled the house with wonderful scents. I joined a book club at the local library and discovered that I had opinions and insights that other people found interesting and valuable. The money from the house sale allowed me to live comfortably without constantly worrying about every expense. I took a watercolor painting class at the community center and found that I had a natural talent I'd never explored. I bought a comfortable new bed with high-quality sheets that felt luxurious against my skin. Most importantly, I adopted a dog from the animal shelter, a sweet, gentle border collie mix named Rosie, who had been surrendered by a family that could no longer care for her. Rosie and I were perfect companions. She followed me around the cottage, content to lie at my feet while I read or painted, and she slept beside my bed every night like a faithful guardian. Walking her twice daily gave me exercise and opportunities to meet neighbors, many of whom became genuine friends. 3 months after I moved into the cottage, my phone rang on a Saturday afternoon. Emma's voice was small and hesitant. "Grandma, it's me. Could I come see your new house?" "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to show it to you. When would you like to visit? Maybe this weekend? Mom said she could drive me over if you want to see me." "I always want to see you, Emma. How about tomorrow afternoon?" The next day, Emma sat at my small kitchen table, perfectly sized for 2 people sharing tea and homemade cookies. She looked around the bright, cheerful space with obvious curiosity and something that might have been relief. "It's really nice, Grandma," she said finally. "It feels peaceful." What do you mean?" "Our apartment is always loud and crowded, and Mom and Dad argue about money all the time. But this place feels calm and happy. It feels like you." 2 weeks later, Jake called and asked if he could visit too. He spent the afternoon in my small garden, helping me plant tulip bulbs for spring while Rosie supervised from her favorite sunny spot. "Grandma," Jake said as we worked together in the soil, "why did you move away from us?" The question broke my heart, but I knew he deserved an honest answer appropriate for his age. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people forget how to treat each other kindly, even when they live in the same house. I moved somewhere where I could feel happy and respected every day." "Are you happier now?" I looked around my small garden, at the cottage windows glowing warmly in the afternoon sun, at Rosie's tail wagging as she watched us work, at my grandson's earnest face waiting for my answer. "Yes, Jake, I'm much happier now." 1 month later, Sarah began visiting on Sunday afternoons. We'd sit in my garden when the weather was nice, or in my cozy living room when it was cold, drinking iced tea or hot chocolate and talking about everything except Derek and the house on Maple Street. She told me about her work at the clinic, about Emma's progress in school and Jake's latest soccer achievements, about books she was reading and dreams she was rediscovering now that her life had stabilized in their new apartment. "I'm thinking about going back to school," she confided one Sunday in December, as snow began falling outside my kitchen window. "There's a nurse practitioner program that offers evening classes. It would take 3 years, but the salary increase would be substantial." "That sounds wonderful," I said, meaning it completely. "You were always so bright and ambitious. I'm proud of you for thinking about your future." "I couldn't have considered it before," she admitted. Between the mortgage payments we couldn't afford and Derek's attitude about women in demanding careers. But now that we're managing our own expenses and I can see what I'm truly capable of, everything feels possible again. I realized that my decision to sell the house had freed not just me, but Sarah as well. She was rediscovering her independence and strength, qualities that had been slowly eroding during those years of financial stress and living in someone else's space, even when that space belonged to her mother. Derek never visited, and I never extended an invitation. Some relationships, once damaged beyond a certain point, cannot and perhaps should not be repaired. I heard occasional updates about him through Sarah and the children. He was doing well at his construction job, had been promoted to crew supervisor, was learning to manage his own household and finances. I wished him well from a distance, but I felt no desire to rebuild a connection with someone who had shown such disrespect for my generosity and such casual cruelty in front of my grandchildren. The first winter in my cottage was magical in ways I hadn't anticipated. Instead of feeling isolated, I felt peaceful. Instead of feeling lonely, I felt free. I spent Christmas Eve with Emma, Jake, and Sarah, cooking a small but perfect dinner in my tiny kitchen. Derek spent the holiday with his brother's family in Kansas, an arrangement that seemed to suit everyone involved. On New Year's Eve, I sat in my living room with Rosie curled beside me, reflecting on the extraordinary changes of the past year. 12 months earlier, I had been feeling invisible and unwelcome in my own home, accepting treatment that diminished my worth and dignity. Now, I was living independently, surrounded by people who valued my company, pursuing interests that brought me joy, and modeling self-respect for my grandchildren. Spring brought new energy and new possibilities. My garden exploded with color as the tulips Jake and I had planted emerged from the earth in brilliant shades of red, yellow, and purple. I joined a senior hiking group and discovered that my 74-year-old body was stronger than I'd given it credit for. We explored mountain trails I'd never seen, despite living in Colorado for decades. I also began volunteering at the local women's shelter, helping with their financial literacy program. Many of the women there were facing situations similar to what Sarah had experienced: domestic challenges, financial crises, difficult family dynamics. I found that my life experience, my years of managing a household and making difficult decisions, gave me valuable insights to share with women who were rebuilding their lives. One afternoon in May, I was working in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. Emma and Jake tumbled out, followed by Sarah, who was carrying a small wrapped package. "Happy Mother's Day, Grandma," Emma called out, running to hug me with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. "We made you something special," Jake added, bouncing with excitement. The package contained a photo album they had created together, filled with pictures from our years living together, but only the happy moments. Emma at the piano recital I'd attended, Jake scoring a goal at soccer while I cheered from the sidelines, family dinners around my old kitchen table, homework sessions, bedtime stories. The final page held a recent photo of all of us in my cottage garden, with a handwritten note from Emma. "Thank you for showing us that it's important to choose happiness and respect. We love you, Grandma." That afternoon, we sat in my garden eating homemade strawberry shortcake while Rosie entertained us with her attempts to catch butterflies. The conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and genuine warmth. For the first time since they'd moved in with me 3 years earlier, I felt like we were truly family again. Not people tolerating each other's presence, but individuals who chose to be together because we brought joy to each other's lives. As summer progressed, Emma and Jake began spending 1 weekend per month at my cottage. Sarah would drop them off Saturday morning and pick them up Sunday evening, giving us uninterrupted time to bake cookies, work in the garden, take Rosie for long walks, and simply enjoy each other's company without the stress and tension that had defined our previous living arrangement. During one of these visits, Emma asked me something that showed how much she'd matured over the past year. "Grandma, are you glad you sold the house?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm sad about losing the house where I lived with your grandfather and raised your mother," I said honestly. "But I'm grateful that selling it led me to a life where I feel valued and peaceful every day. Sometimes we have to let go of things we love in order to find something better. Like when I outgrew my favorite stuffed animal but found books that I loved even more. Exactly like that, sweetheart." The following autumn, Sarah called with news that filled me with pride and joy. She had been accepted into the nurse practitioner program and would begin classes in January. Derek, she reported, had initially been resistant to the idea, worried about the impact on their family life and finances. But Sarah had stood firm in her decision, and he had eventually become supportive. "I think watching you choose yourself taught me that I could do the same thing," Sarah told me during one of our Sunday visits. "I spent so many years trying to keep everyone else happy that I forgot I had the right to pursue my own dreams and set my own boundaries." That Christmas, I hosted Emma and Jake for a weekend celebration at my cottage. We decorated my small tree with ornaments I'd collected over decades, baked several varieties of cookies, and watched old holiday movies while Rosie dozed contentedly by the fireplace. Sarah joined us for Christmas dinner, a simple but elegant meal that we all prepared together in my tiny kitchen. "This feels more like family than anything we experienced in the big house," Emma observed, helping me arrange cookies on a festive platter. She was right. In the cottage, we were together by choice rather than obligation, and that made all the difference. As I sit here now, 18 months after selling the house on Maple Street, I'm writing this letter on a peaceful Sunday morning. Rosie is sleeping in a patch of sunlight by the window, Emma and Jake are visiting next weekend, and Sarah will graduate from her first year of the nurse practitioner program next month. My cottage feels completely like home in a way that the big house never did during those final difficult years. Every morning, I wake up in my own space, make my coffee exactly the way I like it, and step outside to tend my flowers without worrying about someone's disapproval or criticism. When I change the television channel, no one overrides my choice. When I invite friends over, I don't have to navigate anyone else's schedule or preferences. When I make decisions about my home, my life, my future, those decisions are mine alone. Most importantly, the relationships in my life are now based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and convenience. Emma and Jake visit because they want to spend time with me, not because they live in my house and have no choice. Sarah and I talk because we enjoy each other's company, not because we're thrown together by circumstances. Derek and I have no relationship at all, which has proven to be the healthiest outcome for everyone involved. I've learned that a house is just walls, windows, and a roof until you fill it with love. But love must be mutual to be genuine. Real love includes respect, gratitude, and consideration. It means treating each other with kindness, even during difficult times. It means recognizing that generosity is not the same as being a doormat, and that helping family doesn't require sacrificing your own dignity or happiness. Most importantly, I've discovered that it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to say no to treatment that diminishes you, even from people you love deeply. It's never too late to walk away from situations that make you feel small, invisible, or unwelcome in your own life. The decision to sell my house was not made in anger or spite, but from a place of self-respect and hope. I wanted to live somewhere that felt like home, surrounded by people who valued my presence, in a space where I could be fully myself without apology or compromise. My cottage is smaller than the house where I raised my children, but it's large enough for my happiness. My garden is more modest, but every plant in it brings me joy. My life is quieter now, but it's filled with genuine peace rather than anxious accommodation. To anyone reading this who recognizes something familiar in my story, I want you to understand. You are worthy of respect in your own home. You deserve gratitude for your generosity, not demands for more sacrifice. You have the right to set boundaries, even with people you love, and especially with people who claim to love you. If you're not receiving basic human dignity in your own life, it's not selfish to make a change. It's not cruel to prioritize your own well-being. It's not wrong to choose peace over chaos, respect over convenience, and your own happiness over everyone else's comfort. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to show them that self-respect matters, that boundaries are healthy, and that choosing yourself is not only acceptable, but necessary for a life worth living. The morning Derek declared, "This house isn't yours," he was wrong about the legal facts, but accidentally right about the emotional reality. The house had stopped feeling like mine because I had allowed others to treat it, and me, as if my ownership, my feelings, and my comfort didn't matter. Now, in my perfect little cottage with Rosie at my feet and mountain views from every window, I can say with complete confidence, this house is mine. Not just because my name is on the deed, though it is. Not just because I pay the mortgage, though I do, but because it feels like home in every way that truly matters. This house is mine, and I am finally, completely, happily myself within its walls. With love and hope from Colorado, Eleanor May Thompson, P.S. The young family who bought my house on Maple Street sent me a lovely card last month with photos of their children playing in the backyard where Emma and Jake used to run. The maple trees are thriving. The garden Paul and I planted is being tended with obvious care, and the house is once again filled with the laughter and love it was always meant to hold. Sometimes letting go of something precious allows it to flourish in ways you never could have imagined, and the same, I've discovered, is true for people.